Hi, so I'm going to do a video today and talk a little bit about control, which is something that if you're a sufferer of codependency or you've have poor mental and emotional health, control will be a very, very big um, core reason why you behave in all these different ways. So like, the people pleasing, the love bombing, the manipulation, it's all ways that you're trying to gain some kind of control back in your external environment. And the reason we do this is because if you've grown up or lived in a very, very chaotic environment for a very long period of time, like I say, whether that was in your childhood or through abusive relationships or just crazy external circumstances, like, you might have something that caused you trauma, like, and that could have been a loss of job. So, you had to live in chaos for a while because of having no funds. There's lots of reasons why we can cause it, but what causes that? But it's usually for long periods of time living in a chaotic environment. And what happens as humans is there's such a big trauma response that goes on within the body on all different levels, like within your nervous system, and all of the other systems in the body, that we learn that we need to gain some kind of control to survive. Even when your external environment is no longer chaotic, you still spend, like, people who have been through a lot of trauma still spend most of their life trying to gain control of their external environment. And that's when then behavioural tactics come in, like the people pleasing, the nice person, the manipulation, the narcissism, the overt narcissism, love bombing, all these different things that we do as humans is all because we're trying to gain some kind of control. And this can be even like in terms of having OCD, like obsessive compulsive disorder. And like I was talking to you in my very first video, we definitely have problems with addiction and addictive patterns in the terms of even controlling like your food, the type of exercise you do. You become all dependent on all these things because you're trying to control your environment. So when something feels good, the reason that you want it more and more and more and you become addicted to it is because you can control your environment. Like, oh, like on this day when I did all of these things, that felt really good. So if I do it all the time, then I can control my environment. I control how I will feel. Because the thing is, you can't control your external environment ever. But by having something that feels nice, it feels like you can control your internal environment, and that's why we then become addicted to that, whether they are positive or negative things, whether you're talking about alcohol or drugs or food or exercise or people or behavioral patterns. It all comes down to control. And so you have to kind of have some compassion and empathy for yourself when you are working through shadows and trying to understand, like, oh, I'm this and I'm that. Gain awareness, yes, like, stop being ignorant and pretending like I just do this, I just do that. Accept that you have these issues, but have compassion for yourself, because the reason that you're doing this or behaving in these manipulative ways or addictive ways is because you lived in a chaotic environment and experienced trauma for an extensive period of time. And that's why we do this. This is why we like behave in these ways. So the thing is, the more relaxed, calm, in alignment your internal world is, you will find that these behavioural traits naturally drop off. Like, yes, there is an element of we need to go back and do trauma work, we need to do shadow work and inner child healing, especially when you've had extensive trauma. But if you can make your internal world calm, and more relaxed in terms of like nervous system regulation, you know, like being very aware of the things that you put in your body, like in terms of food, and doing nice exercise, doing breath work. Like, I ain't saying these are going to stop you from being controlling, but what it does do is that relaxed state in your nervous system stops you from living on high alert 24/7, because regardless of when you're, so basically, yeah, like living in trauma, living in a very chaotic environment for a very long time for me, even when my home environment was no longer chaotic, I still could not stop the internal need and fear. So it's like, even when things are going good, I would constantly be waiting for them to go wrong. And I'd search and scan the room and scan people, because I desperately want to know if, you know, like if they're changing their mood. This is another thing about what they say about empathy, you know, empathic people. Are you empathic, or is it trauma? Because yes, like I believe there's two sides to it, but because of experiencing trauma for a long time, I was very perceptible to people's changing energy, changing emotions, changing body language, change in the way they spoke to me, the way they communicated. Like, say for example, someone wouldn't respond in a certain way, I would instantaneously be thinking that's danger and try to gain some kind of control back. And that's when my trauma would be triggered. And like I've said to you before, it's like a button that you press, and then the behavioural tactics come in, and they're all about control. But after a long period of time, like I've been out of like abusive relationship for 4 years now, and done a lot of internal work on my home environment. So my external environment is a good foundation now, and stable, and my internal environment is a good foundation and stable. And I've noticed that I've dropped so many of my controlling behaviours. Like I said, I had severe OCD. Like, everything in my house had to be very particular. I would never have a messy house. My appearance would never be messy. Because I couldn't control my external environment, I controlled everything about whatever I could control. So, and I always notice, yeah, if I'm really triggered about something, I start doing intensive housework again, and I'm like, hold on a minute, why am I going in with this cleaning? And it's a trauma response. Somewhere along the line, I've been triggered and I've not picked it up, and I'll start doing extensive cleaning. I'm like, hold on. But like back 4 or 5 years ago, like, honest to God, everything had to be so particular. And I still like things really particular. And I still do have some really strange behaviours. Like, I colour coordinate my wardrobe, and I like to have all the things in my cupboards lined up in a certain way in the kitchen. And I do like little things like that. But I mean, to the extent of, if you come in my house, you wouldn't even feel comfortable to sit down, because I would actually be thinking, no, I don't want you to touch my cushions, and I don't want you to touch my floor. And the kids would like want to play with their toys, and I did not like that, because I'd be like, but the house is immaculate, you can't do this, you can't do that. Like, it wasn't a home, mate, it wasn't a home at all. But regardless of the fact of the other trauma that was going on, this is how my behaviours were. And this OCD, I noticed bit by bit, it actually completely whittled away. And this goes for my daughter too. So right at the beginning, she had severe OCD. She had it in a different way to me. Like, she would try and control her environment by having to walk in certain places and do certain steps and touch certain things a certain amount of times, and like eat her food in a certain way, which I did that a bit too. But her OCD, her trauma came out in OCD a lot worse than mine did in OCD. Mine was more anxious and post-traumatic stress, but hers was manifesting in OCD really, really bad. And I can tell you now, 4 years down the line, she barely does any of that stuff now. Don't get me wrong, again, we're a very quirky family. We all have ways about us and do things in certain ways. And like, you know, even when you think about autism, ADHD, these are all things, you know, that are, I believe, our coping mechanisms, our brain and body's way of coping with things. Like, yes, don't get me wrong, some people are born with it and it's definitely genetical and all these sort of things, but those behavioural traits topped up with living in a chaotic environment for long periods of time, which I did and so did my children, led to these behavioural traits, which again was all trying to gain control. And over the years, she dropped that and doesn't need to do those behaviours, or hardly any of them now. Like, she has her weird ways, like I said, like I have my weird ways, my son has his weird ways, but it's not needed to control. However, what I want you to understand is, even when you've been a sufferer of mental health trauma for long periods of time, yeah, even when you've done a lot of healing work, when you get triggered, you will instantaneously go into this control mode. And about a year ago, I kept getting this sign that kept coming, gas, and I made a video about it, and it took me a while to understand it. And it's like, when I've been triggered about something and not realised, and I go into a trauma response, and because even if you have a high level of awareness, you've had a spiritual awakening, you're not the body. I may not be this body, I may not be this physical body yet, but this physical body still has trauma responses. I lived in chaos for a very, very long time. I grew up in chaos. Like, it will happen sometimes. Sometimes I will be triggered and go into control mode. And that's when I notice that I will feel the need. And that's when gas used to come up, when I wasn't aware of me, that I'd been triggered. If it hadn't been in my awareness that, oh, Laura, you've been triggered. Like, you need to actually take some action to calm your nervous system back down, to breathe, to relax, because right now you're operating from a wound. You're operating from a shadow aspect, or you're operating from like a wounded part of yourself. And if you don't kind of bring yourself back into alignment, everything you're doing, you'll then spiral, and then your level of needing to control goes crazy. So what I'm saying is that the reason that we behave in these ways is to gain some kind of control. But unfortunately, you're never going to be able to control the external environment. And that is, in terms of anything, like, nothing is ever consistent. Like, you could, even if you was the perfect of health, you could walk outside and get run over tomorrow. You could lose your job. You could, something painful could happen to someone that you love. You could lose your partner. They could leave you or pass away. Like, disaster happens. Bad things happen in life. They do happen. And when you've been a trauma victim, or have serious mental health issues, or had mental health issues, the idea of something going wrong is scary, because you know that when that happens, it will trigger your trauma responses and you could spiral. And that's when we often start behaving like that. But like I said, you can't actually control them. But what you can do is gain control of your physical vessel, of your physical body, and have the right tools, have compassion and empathy for yourself, that when you're behaving in that way, be open to the people around you maybe expressing that you're behaving in a certain way. So something that my son does, that he's different to me and my daughter, like, to a certain degree, her and I are quite able to take criticism and self-reflect. Like, Callum can definitely self-reflect, don't get me wrong, he's deep, he's an old soul too, but criticism to him is really, really triggering. So when I'm trying to maybe say to him, like, this, what you're doing right now, like, is that possibly because of this? And this might not be like the greatest way to deal with this, or this particular behaviour makes me feel like this, or it's making your sister feel like this, or one of your friends, or something like that. Everything that I would say to him would be critique. He takes it so personal. He said to me, like, this is what I mean, he can self-reflect, because we've had this conversation. He's like, literally, Mum, it feels like you're punching me in the heart. Like, I hate you and I want to kill you in that moment. Like, not literally, but he's like, you telling me that I've done something makes me feel like I'm so bad, so wrong, that he just gets super defensive. He's got loads better at that now, because we have actually spoke about it, and I've said to him, look, it is not a personal criticism. I'm just trying to help you develop in character, be aware. And I think the fact that I own up, say sorry, talk to them about my shortcomings, talk to him about things that I've done wrong, has helped him to kind of be more open to that and realise, you know, like I'm not actually just being an arsehole to him, I'm just bringing something into his awareness. So what I'm trying to get at is that, like, it's important that you can be open to what people are saying to you around you, because when you are, maybe you've been triggered and you're in a trauma response and you're acting in a certain way, and these behavioural traits are going, they're masks, they're like buttons you've put on the suit, you've put on the trauma response suit now, and you're wearing that mask and you're acting in this way. Sometimes it's really hard for us to see that we are behaving in that way. And our defence mechanisms are so big that we're like, no, pushing everyone away, however that will be. Like me and like my daughter react differently to my son, but we will have it's a reaction, you know. So being compassionate and open to hearing from other people, like, you know, maybe you're behaving like this, and it's like, what can you do in this moment? Like, how are you feeling? What's going on? This is how you can kind of help learn to control your internal environment, because often you know, there's no point practicing this stuff here when you're triggered, because when you're triggered, it's just like, rah, everything's crazy. But like chatting with each other and just like self-reflecting, and like I said, definitely with my children, me owning my shortcomings, saying sorry without a sorry but, because that was a big thing of mine, like sorry but it's not sorry if there's a but, is it? So it's just like, sorry, I behaved in that way. Like a couple of days ago, I was like quite triggered about something, and just trying to, like, my nervous system was fucked, and I was trying to bring it back into alignment, but I was a little like, I could tell that I was a bit aloof, like away with the fairies, and like Callum and Beth were asking me things and I would be a bit like short-tempered, and I just explained to them after, like, you know, I'm sorry for my behaviours, like I've been triggered, I've been trying to bring myself back into alignment, it's taken me a little bit of time, I'm sorry if I've been impatient, I'm sorry if I've been moody, and just owning it, do you know what I mean, without, I'm sorry, but you was really winding me up. I'm sorry, but you didn't tidy your room. I'm sorry, but you screaming on the computer was getting on my tits. Like, I was just like, I'm sorry, I've been short-tempered. Like, I've been, like, a bit impatient. But that, again, that comes from the self-awareness. But what I'm saying is, when I was triggered, for example, and I was basically just deeply cleaning and doing all this stuff, it was me trying to gain control again and being aware that, you know, that's what we sometimes do. We do these things to try and gain back control, because it doesn't feel good when you've been triggered. A trauma response happens, and if you don't gain control, then that's usually when it spirals. Like, now I don't spiral, but back in the day, like I said, that's when I would go into, I know when I've spiraled, when I'm completely out of alignment, because I can see now, I can see that the body is behaving in certain ways to try and gain back some kind of control. So how this affects, like, let's bring this right back into like people pleasing and being nice and manipulative and these behavioural techniques. If you're in a relationship with someone and you feel out of control for whatever reason, we behave in them ways to gain some kind of control back, however that may be, you know. And it's just about being aware of that, aware that that's what you're doing. Oh, I'm trying to gain some control here. I can't control anything external. Reassuring that aspect of, like, whatever it is. Because if you get to know the aspects, you'll know what aspect of yourself is triggered. You'll know, like, oh, this is the part of me that's insecure. This is the part of me that's scared of rejection. This is the part of me that fears abandonment. This is the part of me that was hurt. This, like, I can kind of tell now what aspect is triggered and kind of give that aspect what it needs in that moment, rather than letting it spiral, and then needing to behave in them ways. But that's not to say that still I don't do that sometimes and have to pull myself back in, and be in check. And that's why I say it's good when you've got people around you who you love and care, and they can offer you their opinions, like, and like, to kind of bring things into your awareness and mirror it back to you. And also when you've got your tools of, like, how can I bring my nervous system back into regulation and stop myself from doing this, because you are behaving in them ways to gain control, and we can't gain control, we can't, like, always gain control of our external, well, we can never gain control of our external environment. We can only just be able to navigate life. And that's what you have to accept when you've lived in a chaotic environment for a long period of time, or you have experienced trauma, that there will be times when your external environment is going a certain way that makes you feel out of control. And the only way that you can come back to it is to come back to yourself, to come back to the self in however way that is for you. Now, everyone does it in very many different ways. There are very different practices and tools that work for them to bring them back because their external environment's crazy. But yeah, it's just so having that compassion with yourself. Look, I've been behaving this way because I've felt out of control. I don't want to do that. So I'm going to regulate my nervous system, and I'm not going to try and control other people. I'm not going to try and control the external situations. I'm not going to try and stop myself from ever experience. Because this is the other thing, like you don't want to keep yourself stuck. Like, you've got to push. If you want to grow as a person, you're going to want to push. Like, some people don't. Some people, if you've been through a lot of trauma and bad mental and emotional health, sometimes it's just enough to stabilize yourself. That's enough. And that's okay, like some people don't want to go that further mile because it's just too much for them to put themselves in situations again that will make them feel out of control. But when you are wanting to grow, and maybe push forward in any area of your life, this isn't just with relationships, this could be with work, with anything, you've got to remember your nervous system is not going to like that, and growth will make your nervous system, and any kind of connection and any kind of job that puts you under stress will make your nervous system go back and have a trauma response. So, if you don't want to just stay where you are and you do want to carry on growing, you have to be aware that you will be triggered, and then you will fall back into those controlling behaviours where you're trying to control your external environment because it's scary, trying to control how others perceive you, trying to control how, if someone will leave, if someone will stay, trying to control how successful a project will be, or how well something you've organised goes, or even if it's a job interview, or all these things that push us out of our comfort zones are what make us grow. But when you've had trauma, that is like proper triggering to be pushed out your comfort zone. So it's about being compassionate with yourself. Like, I'm going to have to really work on this because I do want to grow. I do want to do whatever this goal is that you're trying to do, but like facing your fears, just being aware that there's going to be some controlling behaviors. And that's why, instead of being like, when I was talking about nice person mask, when I'm talking about people pleasing, when I'm talking about manipulation, like, don't be triggered by it. Just accept that that's what you do. The more you can accept and not judge yourself for doing these things, the easier and quicker it is for you to address them when you are triggered. Because it'll be like, oh my God, I'm people pleasing again. Oh my God, I'm trying to control this person. I'm trying to control how people perceive me. I'm so scared of being rejected because I'm going to put this new project out there and it's really weird. It's different, or it's going to push me out of my comfort zone. So I can see that I'm behaving in this way, and I'm trying to control I'm not speaking my truth because I'm trying to control the conflict. It's all about control. That's what I'm getting at. But having that awareness that that's what you're doing means that you can take note of that and do some work to come back into alignment. Instead of pretending that you're so perfect and that you don't do this and you don't do that, it really doesn't help. It doesn't help. Like, stop judging yourself. Have acceptance that you've been through trauma, or you've got mental health, or you've got these behavioural techniques, and you haven't got them forever, but you've got them at the moment. And acknowledging them means that you're not judging yourself, which means you can then push forward and come back to yourself. But, that's what it comes down to, control. And that's what I was saying to you. This is why people become addicted to drugs and alcohol, behaviours, people, because it means they can control how they're feeling internally. And even when, even if you're not addicted to drugs, alcohol, people, or anything like that, you're addicted to controlling your internal environment stops you from being able to grow, because what maybe your practices or the level that you've got to, you're able to control how everything's going on internally. You're still trying to control, and when you're in relationships with people and you're trying to control how they perceive you or control where it goes or stuff like that, these are all things that are very triggering to people that have had trauma, you know. It's also sad because it's often things that people do want to engage in, you know. Just because you've been through trauma, why does that mean, just because you've gone through trauma, why does that mean that you don't get to have a very successful career? You don't get to have a loving relationship? You don't get to push yourself out of your comfort zone? You do. You deserve it just as much as everybody else does. Like, and knowing these things, gaining self-awareness, having these tools means that you get that opportunity too. Like, you know, you get the opportunities that other people do to share authentic connections, to have a successful career, to earn the money that you want to earn, to travel, to just have whatever you desire. You deserve that. Like, and just because it might mean that you won't be able to control the external for a little while, and like I said, you never can do, like, that doesn't mean you can't have it. You just have to work a little bit harder, and be more compassionate and be more self-aware, and there's nothing wrong with that, because, you know, let's be honest, trauma survivors are the most empathic. They're usually the most self-aware, for the ones that do the work anyway. The ones that don't do the work, like I said, sometimes they are happy to stay where they are, or they have been through so much pain that actually to acknowledge what their behaviours and what their trauma has caused them to do would be too horrific. Like, that's why people with NPD, narcissistic personality disorder, don't often change, because their trauma is so deep, yeah, and the pain that they've caused other people is so bad that if they become self-aware of what they've done, it'd probably kill them. It'd probably kill them, because it's quite hard for you to accept. When you become self-aware, it's quite hard for you to start accepting how your behaviours impact you and the others around you, let alone when you've been as bad as an NPD sufferer. So I can understand and relate why they just don't want to open up that can of worms, because, you know, they'd probably end up in a mental institute or dead, because the shame and the judgment that they'd feel towards themselves would just be too big. So that's what I'm saying. So everyone is wants to do different things and at different journeys and different levels, but this is just for those people who have been through trauma, who do want to grow, who do want to share authentic connections, who do want to go for their dream job, who do want to do something that is triggering a fear response in them. It's just about being aware of, like, you know, that's what I want to do. I want to create help for those people, you know, those type of people.